Okay, well, I'm Mike Aller with Florida Makes. We have Elaine Singleton with University of South Florida, who's the chair of the Florida Supply Chain Summit, who will be opening up our webinar today. So Elaine, you can go ahead and take it away and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our very first webinar in a series of 3 webinars that we'll be doing over the summer leading up to the 5th annual Florida Supply Chain Summit. I can't believe it's 5 years. So it started in 2019. Took a break in 2020 for a very well-known reason, and then regrouped again in 2021. And we've had an annual summit every year since then. And this year, we've had it in Tampa the last 2 years. This year, our summit will be in Miami at the Biscayne Marriott from September 9th through midday on September 11th. And I'm just delighted. My name's Elaine Singleton, as Mike said, and I'm a co-chairperson with Dr. Gregory Maloney of Florida University, Florida FIU, Florida International University in Miami or near Miami. So we're both delighted to kind of be hosting this webinar series. We're excited about the topics. Today is probably one of the most exciting topics, and I think everybody's really anxious to hear the report from Mike Aller, who's the director of supplier development for Florida Makes, Kevin Carr, the CEO of Florida Makes, and Connor Hilwa, who is a coordinator in the supplier development group alongside Mike. So welcome, gentlemen. We're delighted that you're here. Welcome anyone that's joined us. I see a number of familiar names out there, and feel free to put anything in the chat that you would like. And Greg and I will be happy to kind of feed those questions into Mike and Kevin and Connor. Okay, with that, I think one other quick announcement. Please be sure to pre-register for the summit. You don't have to put any money down yet, but if you pre-register, you're guaranteed the early bird rate, and it'll help us with, once we have the content and the website up to speed for the full registration, we'll notify you and we'll automatically register you and send you a notification. So please feel free to do that. It's www.floridasupplychainsummit.com, all lowercase. All right, take it away, Mike and Kevin and Connor.
Thank you. I'll let, again, I'm Mike Aller. I'm the Director of Supplier Development for Florida Makes. I'm a member of the steering committee for the Florida Supply Chain Summit, which I have been for the last several years, and as well as Connor is also helping us with the summit. And we have a very excited to have our CEO of Florida Makes, Kevin Carr, here to talk about a very important report which was issued by the Florida Department of Commerce late last year, all about Florida manufacturing. This is the first time this type of report has ever been issued in the state of Florida, and there's a lot of great information and a great story that we have to tell about manufacturing in Florida. So Kevin, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Elaine, for having me and give me this opportunity. As Mike said, this is a first of a kind report. It was asked for 2 sessions ago by the legislature to prepare a report, took a look at where kind of what the state of Florida manufacturing is, what some of the needs are, what some of the opportunities are. And it got passed in the budget bill without any money, which is kind of funny. And so it became sort of an unfunded mandate. Commerce had approached us to work with them on it, assuming there was funding. And then we agreed that it was such an important document that both sides, Commerce and Florida Makes, would suck it up and just do the report. because we thought that was an important stake to get in the ground. So what you're looking at is the cover of that report. Again, like I said, it's a first of a kind. We're pretty proud of the results, but I would argue, really my biggest ambition with the report was for it to serve as an educational piece. You know, we often in Florida talk about ourselves in terms of, you know, tourism and in terms of agriculture and in terms of a lot of other industries, but not manufacturing. And yet, you know, manufacturing, we always believe deserves a seat at the table. And so what we're trying to do with this document is not only educate us, educate Floridians, but educate the legislature, educate the administration on the importance of manufacturing to the Florida economy. So who's control, Mike, you?
Yes.
So just a couple manufacturing facts. Sometimes these shock people, sometimes they don't. But, you know, Florida has 25,803 manufacturing establishments. Now, you can't not call yourself a manufacturing state and have that many businesses operating in the state, you know, and they produce, you know, almost getting towards 500 million jobs. That number continues to grow, and I'll show you some of those growth figures. Probably what's most important about manufacturing in terms of the economy is the wages tend to be much higher than other industries, particularly a lot of Florida's traditional industries, as I mentioned earlier, you know, and they sit at about 74,005 K a year. And when you get into manufacturing intense regions like Brevard County, that number's in the 90s, close to 100,000 in terms of your average annual wage. And I think sometimes because why we don't really kind of recognize Florida as a manufacturing state is that a lot of those 25,000, nearly 26,000 manufacturers are 80% of them are under 20 employees. So they're very small firms. You drive by them every day, you don't even know they're there. You know, you'd be surprised how many of your neighbors and how many of the buildings that you drive by daily are in fact manufacturing companies that are producing products or component products for large systems. You know, one of the things that we've noticed over the past 10 years is there's been a tremendous amount of growth in manufacturing, and I'll show you that in terms of GDP and workforce as we move along. But one of the things we tried to understand is why is that happening? Why is there so much growth? Why is it becoming a much bigger thing? And we looked at, you know, when did Florida pass by New York in terms of its population? And that happened back during 2013. And as we were looking at this chart here, we swear we were looking at the growth chart for manufacturing in the country. And as we investigated a lot of this a little bit further, it just seemed natural that as our population grows, and most of you know our population is growing like I think 1,100 persons a day. As that population grows, that's where manufacturing will continue to grow as well, because manufacturers go to where the population is. It goes to where their customers are. It goes to where their buyers and their suppliers are. So it's only natural. And when you look at where manufacturing, concentrated manufacturing centers are around the country, it tends to aggregate around larger populations. So as we continue to grow, I think we're going to continue to see manufacturing grow. Now, those of you who work with the chamber, you know, they've always had an aspiration in 2030 to have the 5th largest manufacturing employment state in the country. And I think when we first started looking at it a few years back, we were at 14. This chart gives you a sense of, okay, we're now at 12, or we were at 12. Stop there. This is 2022 data. And you could see the states that were ahead of Florida in terms of manufacturing. And these are a lot of states that you would think of traditionally as manufacturing states, particularly ones in the Midwest and along the coast. So when we did this study, it was based on 2022 data, and we were at 12. We've since moved from 12 to 10th. We passed Georgia and New York. So you can continue to see our growth as we move along in the direction of becoming more and more where manufacturing is done in the United States. And I think what's probably more important as a comparison is not where we are, but the rate at which we're growing, which is in the graph you see on the right. Compared to the very same states, you can see the growth rate over 2014 to 2022 in Florida is, I think it's like up around 22, 23%. But by comparison to other states, off the charts. And you can see where there's a number of, traditional manufacturing states where that employment growth has gone negative. So, that's something that, shout at the rafters about in the state, that our manufacturing growth is at a rate higher than any other state in the nation. Next slide. So again, I said we're now 10th largest. Our employment sits at 424,800 employees in Florida's manufacturing enterprises. So it's enough to make noise, I think, in the sort of economic and policy making circles. Next slide. I mentioned this earlier when I talked about some of the average wages, but by comparison to a lot of other industries in the state, manufacturing employment, the average annual wages kind of stands above the average for the state. So it's not just good for manufacturing, but it's good for our standard of living as well, versus living on a heavily tourism or agricultural based economy. This is an economy that spreads itself out in the form of wealth to the folks that work in the industry. So this is probably one of the biggest arguments for why we want to continue and invest here, other than resilience and other factors like that. Standard of living is a driving force, and having a strong manufacturing economy, whether you're a state or a country, is a key to that resilience and the key to that sort of independence, and also significant in terms of diversifying your economy. I know throughout COVID, manufacturing is one of those companies that kept the doors open and kept the goods flowing, and we owe a lot to manufacturers during that period of time. Next slide. GDP is a similar story. Actually, this is kind of a wild story. Back in 2014, we were putting out about $43.5 billion in manufactured goods. At the end of 2022, that number was up around 73 billion. And that's kind of, not typical growth. And so that bears watching as that continues to grow forward, and we'll wait to see where those numbers come out in 2023. Similarly, we take a look at, well, what is our growth rate as compared to other states? And with the exception of California, you can see that Florida is head and shoulders above those other traditional 12 manufacturing states that we often compare ourselves to. California, I don't know what to tell you. They produce high value goods. They continue to grow their GDP. I'd love to know what's in the water out there. But Florida still, in comparison to California, still is growing at its GDP at a much faster rate. Next slide. This was interesting to me, and it's kind of controversial when a lot of people look at it. But we got this from the we got this from BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And what we were trying to look at is what is the real value added to Florida GDP by industry, and where does manufacturing sit in that? And you can see there, somewhere in the middle of that chart, you see manufacturing just above arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, above construction, above transportation and warehousing, and well above agriculture and forestry. And I shared some of that with the legislature last year as we would walk through the halls of Tallahassee, and I would get hissed at a little bit because they didn't necessarily want to hear that was happening to some of those sectors. And it's not to sort of denigrate any of those sectors as much as it is to say, hey, where is the policy environment for manufacturing? Where is the belly button in charge in Tallahassee for manufacturing? Where is the committee of the legislature that's focused on manufacturing? While all these other industries do have that kind of attention, whether it's a whole agency just dedicated to that sector, while a lot of them have that attention, manufacturing has basically nothing. The year before we used to walk around and say, what doorbell do we ring? Who is the person we talk to? And so since this report, the Secretary of Commerce has now named one of his directors with the dual title of Chief Manufacturing Officer. So now we have a belly button in charge, which is a great step in the right direction, and we'll begin to work and create bigger steps with the legislature. But the bottom line of the report is that manufacturing matters in Florida. It needs a seat at the table. It needs to have the attention be paid to it as a lot of those other sectors do, for a variety of reasons. Size, contribution to standard of living, resilience, and diversification of our economy, just to name a few. So that was, to me, the important message. If anybody read the report or took anything away from the report, is that manufacturing matters in the state of Florida. And the opening line, if you get a copy of the report, the secretary says Florida is a manufacturing state. That's kind of a bold statement, because 4 or 5 years ago, I spoke with legislatures go, oh, we don't do manufacturing in Florida. So we're trying to wake up the crowd, if you will, with the reality of this industry and its role in Florida. Next slide. The one area where we lag, where we cannot brag, is our productivity. And when I talk about productivity, I'm talking about basically the gross output per worker in that industry, measured in gross revenue per worker. And we operate well below the national average, which is not speak well to our competitiveness, but it also helps, I think, orient where some of our future investment and activities should focus. We ran the numbers using the national average for productivity against the size of the workforce in Florida's economy, and we find that we're basically leaving $16.3 billion on the table by operating with the very same workforce below that national average, that national standard for productivity. And so that's a takeaway from this. The next slide really kind of talks to what it is that we maybe need to do about that. Some of those key factors, and this kind of speaks to the world we're all in. It speaks to, the activity of this group and your work with supply chains. Is, if we want to improve productivity, we've got to have a greater use and development of advanced technologies. We're moving into this digital world. We're in the digital world of Industry 4.0, but a lot of these very small firms have yet to adopt some of those core technologies, and that's going to become a critical factor. I was at your conference last year, and you had a speaker from Lockheed who says, if you're in our supply chain and you're not digitally capable, you're probably not going to be in our supply chain much longer. So this promulgation of greater use of technologies is really important. Along with that comes workforce education. To increase those technologies, you've got to have an incumbent workforce with the necessary skill level. And then you have to also produce, the future workforce, that talent pipeline, those folks that are in middle school and high school into STEM careers that lead to, higher technology, high wage, high skilled jobs in manufacturing. The next bullet really speaks to, the kind of businesses that we bring into the state. And this is the world of, Florida Commerce and Select Florida. and that is increasing the number of high value, high trade industries that we bring into the state. And it's one of those things where if you build it, they will come. We see that as a lot of large, OEMs have moved into the Space Coast as an example. A lot of that supply base that has continued, that feeds those organizations have also moved to the state. Similarly, you'll see that with, even international companies that have come to the state. Eventually their supply chains will follow. So that's a key part of it. And finally, the last bullet is trying to increase the value contribution of our supply system to high value, high trade sectors. And Mike talks about this at the conference. That's one of the reasons why we're interested and contributing partner to the efforts of the Supply Chain Summit. And that is that we're trying to get our firms, those 26,000, to be more actively participating in some of these advanced sort of supply chains that exist in the state, in defense or in the space, aviation, aerospace, and a lot of different industries. A lot of those industries will pull on supply chains from outside of the state. So we're trying to increase supplier participation of our suppliers in our own supply chains, but also in international supply chains. So a lot of focus is on, again, supply chain development, focusing on high value, tradable, advanced manufacturing sectors. So that's kind of where a lot of activity has been to focus. And I know as the folks at Commerce and Select Florida target particular industries, they're on that same page. They're trying to bring in those high value, high trade industries into the state. And a prerequisite to bringing and attracting companies like that into the state is that you have a good workforce and an identifiable pipeline that workforce will continue, and two, that you have a good sound system of supply. Because anymore, as you'll hear more and more companies say, more of the supply is moving closer to the user, the source of use for that system of supply. I think someone from, I can't think of the company, at the conference last year spoke about that. Next slide. We talk about this too in terms of exports. It's weird, we can talk as a state, sometimes we could talk about export without a recognition that those exports are coming from manufacturing. If we want to move goods outside, we have to have the production of goods inside the state, and since the very first time we stood up Florida Makes back in 2015, we would hear from a number of folks, particularly in the transportation sector, saying, hey, we ship a lot of empty containers. Someone told me once that was our biggest export, was empty containers out of the state. So again, manufacturing is essential element, will drive our economy if we can begin to produce more and more goods that we export outside our borders, not just international, but outside of our state. And you can see, the percentage of the existing ones we have, which is kind of small, existing, the highest percentage of all those exports tends to be coming out of manufacturing as compared to other sectors. So that's key if you want that to drive the economy, and you believe in exports, and you believe that exports drive our economic health, but you got to believe that we need to produce the goods to export. Next slide. The other thing that the report did, it was basically divided into three parts. And the first part was kind of the part that I just walked through there, was the state of manufacturing. And then we had a part that talked basically at the ecosystem. What are the assets that are out there that we need to kind of explore? What are some of the opportunities that exist for making our manufacturing sector and our manufacturing ecosystem much better? And it was really intended to put together a compendium of who are the assets and what are those opportunities. So the middle part of the book is very text intensive, And if you're interested, you wanna dig into that. But the other thing that we did in the report is we looked at manufacturing, and what are those sectors that are sort of driving our economy, and also what are some of the sectors that are not so competitive. So for you guys that are sort of economics geeks, there's a shift share analysis in the appendix that kind of takes a look at how do we compare competitiveness. How does our competitiveness compare for our core industries, our strong industries, and where are the ones that we are, regionally competitive and nationally competitive, and where are the ones where we're kind of lagging in those sectors, and that's a good emphasis. When you look at the top 5 sectors, standing out, computer and electronics product manufacturing is big, and as you see here, and it was a surprise to me, we're the 5th largest in terms of nationwide employment in the computer and electronics sector. I wouldn't have guessed that one. So that part of the report, as I said, was to educate the public and the legislators, but it also educated the quote unquote manufacturing people. And you can see the significance of the GDP there. A lot of folks know defense manufacturing is key, and sometimes it's kind of hard to put around what that impact is in our workforce, because we tend to think of defense more broadly and all the amount of money that defense brings to the state, but of the manufacturing component there, you're talking about 30,000 of those federal contractors contributing to the defense industrial base are coming out of Florida. 3rd largest nationwide, and you can see in terms of employment, now that's not manufacturing employment, but that's defense jobs in the state. So that's a critical part of our economy overall, with the manufacturing component of that being very significant in the makeup of our manufacturing compositions. Aviation and aerospace, probably the one that first comes out of people's mouth. They think of the Space Coast, they think of the commercial space, they think of Space Florida, they think of NASA. You've got some 17,000 aerospace related companies, 120,000 workers employed across those industries, and an annual revenue of about 19 billion. And another industry that stands out in the state is this top state for boat building, with over 19% of the establishments in boat building located in the state of Florida. Another significant sector, often kind of overlooked or passed by, and people aren't keeping their eye on it. So, and finally, and this is probably hits home, for the folks that are over in the Tampa area, but it's also one of the most competitive industries that we have down in South Florida, and that's medical devices, equipment, and pharmaceuticals. And so we're 2nd in the nation for medical device manufacturing. Who knew? We did know this. We did some studies back in 2015 that made that stand out. But that's, again, a very important statistic when we talk about being 2nd in the nation in the way that Florida identifies itself. I don't know what's coming after this, Mike.
Could you go into the regional profile?
Yeah, the other thing we did, which was in the report, which is really kind of breaking down, everybody knows that Florida is gigantic. And it's a very diverse state in terms of its populations, its industry, its makeup. And so to sort of whet the appetite of policymakers and legislators and economic development groups around the state, we felt it was important to kind of go in and slice and dice and take a look at what does manufacturing look like on a regional basis, because it by no means uniform when you look at the state and you break up the state that way. And we used the Florida Regional Planning Council regions to define our study. There's a there's a bunch of different groups and regions, and CareerSource uses, I don't know, they have like a 21 region map, and Enterprise Florida back in the day had about 9 regions or something like that. And so we stuck with a profile that was consistent with the economic development community, and we broke our study up into these 10 regions. And what's good about that too is that it'll map back with, the work that they do on their comprehensive economic development studies. And so it was important to do that, and important too, as you're dealing with legislatures and policymakers. You can imagine they immediately go to their section. They listen to a little bit about Florida, but they immediately will go to their region and begin to try to better understand what's going on in their region. If you look at the regional statistics, this is how they break out. And obviously we've got some concentrations of manufacturing in the South, Southwest, Central Florida, Northwest, and what they define as East Central. That's kind of the Orlando area. Central is like the Polk area, and then in Tampa. But you can begin to see from some of the data that we're providing here how that breaks out across the state. And that tells you a couple different things, but and I don't think we have, we don't have here, but I'll tell you a couple different things. When you look at the regions, you can see where the concentrations of manufacturing are, but from an economic development perspective, it's important to note that while we don't have a lot of manufacturers, companies, establishments in the rural areas, often manufacturing drives a much higher percentage of their employment. So while you might see on a statewide average 4% employment in manufacturing, there are some regions where that number can go from 8% to 15% in the rural areas. So skip the body count of companies. It's really important for employment to the rural areas of the state. The next slide I thought was interesting. Mike actually developed this slide. I think he did. Either that or Connor did. Mike took credit for it. But this kind of took a look at, broke up by those regions, where does our manufacturing GDP come from? And to me, when I look at that, I go, where's our value coming from? And so that was a surprise to me, because we always think of South Florida as the driving force. There's some 6,000 firms in Southeast Florida. But when you begin to look at, you can make a liar out of me. When you begin to look at it from an output perspective and the value of that output perspective, you can begin to see, that band from Daytona all the way across to Tampa Bay is basically a whole bottom of that chart. 25, 6%, 2%, driving a big part of our manufacturing economy. So for those of you that kind of live along that I-4 corridor, there's a lot of value in manufacturing being output from those three regions, almost half for the entire state. If you're interested in a copy of the report, here's a QR code that you can scan. The report lives up on the Florida Department of Commerce website. It's downloadable. I like to say it's a pretty easy read, and if you don't like reading, it's a pretty easy scan, because a lot of the pictures will tell the story. I joked with a legislator friend of mine. I said I tried to make it a coloring book so people would just be inclined to just get in there and have fun and learn something. He goes, well, you didn't give me any crayons. But the idea there was to make a very scannable report and a very digestible report, depending on the sector you're from or the region you're from. But like I said at the beginning, it was really to educate and tell a story about the importance of manufacturing in the state. We've been going around for 9 years now, waving that flag and not getting a whole hell of a lot of attention. Now we can put some numbers behind that. Now we got a Secretary of Commerce going, yeah, we are a manufacturing state. And we're hoping we can get more folks on board with that. A lot of that is a critical part. When we talk about supply chain summit, there's the whole trade and logistics side of that. there's that production side of that. You know, it's great that we're able to trade and great that we're able to move product, but we need to make product as well. So we have something to export and something to drive our economy. So that was the intention of the report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't know if it's now or.
Kevin,
Yes.
thank you. And we do. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I wanted to just make one quick comment. I just tried the QR link and it says that the report is blocked. So it perhaps there's a technicality there to be able to access the report. But anyway, the first question, and from our friend Stanley Rigo, is it possible that the reason our South Florida manufacturing companies are lagging in productivity is because of the lack of automation, i.e. robotics and IoT related technologies used in our manufacturing facilities?
Yes, yes, and yes. You know, we're underutilizing those technologies. And we kind of point that out when we say, how do we address this? But that's got to be an important part of, you know, our education, our outreach, and a lot of companies need to be taking a closer look on it. Like I said last year at the panel that I think Mike facilitated at the conference, you know, there were folks talking about how important this is. And so not only does it leave you behind in terms of productivity, it could leave you out of the business if you remain there and not embrace some of these technologies. And so, you know, I think our schools are beginning to produce the right curricula, you know, at the 2-year and 4-year level. And there's a lot more, I would say, facilities out there through which manufacturers can learn more about automation. It sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it sounds. You know, everybody's still got that big thought in their mind that robots are coming to take over the world and AI is going to take my job. These things enhance the capabilities of the existing workforce and the existing capacity in this companies. Most companies that I know that adopt these two technologies do not lose people in the process. They just gain market share. So
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And the second question is from Julio. Whenever I check salary ranges for my position, I don't even touch the lower number, and it looks like a general thing. Are we underpaid in Florida?
Oh. I would argue that we are. You know, I remember a few years back saying to myself, people are allergic to high salaries in this state. What's the issue? I don't know if that standard was set by the other industries, Elaine, that we're, you know, that are surrounding us, you know. Even in the work that we do, I find ourselves somewhat challenged by, you know, oh my God, you guys pay a lot of money. And you know, like, you know, there's centers like ours in other states that put us to shame. So I think we've got to kind of learn that. I mean, this is me editorializing. I shouldn't even say it, but I think we've played the game of, but we don't have any taxes for a long time, you know. If we want to be competitive, the kind of talent that we would attract into the state, the kind of talent for the kind of skills that we were asking for in the previous question, warrant, you know, an investment. So I see companies that are willing to make that investment and provide those benefits seem to be, you know, thriving better than the ones that are still trying to look at human resources as an expense versus an asset, you know. And so that's a mindset. But I felt, I mean, I came from out of state 10 years ago, and I felt that down here, like people would go at certain salaries that to me were like, you know, if you look at some of the average wages of your graduate engineers coming out of a school like USF, some people go, oh, that's tremendous, you know, and that's why some of these very talented people wind up leaving the state for a bigger number. So I think we need to work on that. I think some of the bigger sectors, aerospace, defense, probably don't have that problem. But to remain competitive, we've got to kind of look at that and change our mindset. I just feel like it's a kind of a state mindset. Oh, that's too much for Florida. What does that mean? Oh, because we don't pay taxes. Whatever.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Kevin. I think what I'm seeing on the education side, being a member of the team here at the University of South Florida, is that our students that graduate in supply chain, that learn make it, move it, trade it very, very well, and same with Dr. Maloney's school in South Florida, FIU, are commanding salaries between the average for graduating bachelor degree, Bachelor of Science, because it's all STEM based, is 75,000. And what I seem to notice out there is employers that are from out of state, the pharmaceuticals, aerospace, etc. That's like a slam dunk for them. That's not a big problem at all, right?
Mhm.
We just had a student that commanded 90,000 coming right out of a bachelor degree. So the out-of-state companies seem to, sort of adopt that model, whereas perhaps maybe it's more of the, for lack of a better term, more indigenous companies here in Florida. I don't know.
I think it is, and and I can remember years ago, I won't name names, people marketing the lower wages in Florida as a reason to bring your company here. And really, we should be marketing the strength of our workforce and our supply chains. So
Right.
it's how we see ourselves. It's kind of weird. I remember hiring somebody at a partner at a university, won't name them, and we were setting a salary, and it was below the average wage of their graduate engineer. And I said, "Do you realize what your graduate engineers make?" And there was a real disconnect there between I was looking for a seasoned industrial expert and a graduate engineer, and what the college wanted to pay and what your graduates were making. I said, "I can't send your graduate into a company because they don't know anything yet. But you're not valuing this. I think it is, as you said, indigenous. I think it's something that's very Florida, and we got to kind of get past that."
So another great question related, another from Stanley is, I worry that our regulatory and permitting environment here in Florida may cause us to lose manufacturing jobs to other states. Is there any data that supports that hypothesis?
I know a company that left Central Florida, and the big issue was tangible tax. And they had a lot of equipment, and they wound up moving all their equipment back to where they were also located in Pennsylvania. And I was trying to bring that to the attention of state legislators, and the company owner said, no, actually, it was local legislators. I mean, it was local issues. So, yeah, that could be a case. But I know we are trying to work on and bring some of those issues to the attention of legislators. This is one of the reasons why you have a voice. You need to get the voice to be loud. One of those areas that you hear people talk about that was resolved years ago was sales tax exemption on capital equipment. That was a big thing that changed a lot of investment strategies once that relief came along. Another one that they're working on right now is tax on commercial leases. Somehow we were one of the only states that had taxes on commercial leases. And I think in the last legislature, this most recent, the governor just mentioned the other day, they went from 4.5% down to 2%, and they're working on eliminating that. So yes, I would agree there are some barriers there that create a disadvantage as compared to some other states, but there is more time and attention being paid on how do we eliminate some of those barriers.
And given some of our surrounding states who are practically giving away the land, major tax abatement for companies to relocate to Georgia and, the Carolinas and some of our other states. Has that at all triggered any sense of awareness with our legislation?
With our legislators, I think there's an ideology that's been in place for the past several years. It led to this sort of elimination of things like the Enterprise Florida. This idea of creating or providing incentives as a means of attracting business was a bad thing. It was corporate welfare. It's, picking winners and losers. I don't know that there's any swing in that belief. And so we still are sitting in a situation where places like Georgia and Alabama are going to attract those companies that are looking for a subsidy. But not all companies are. I mentioned earlier in my comments that I think the new currency for economic development has become the workforce. Where are the people? Where are the skilled workers? And right behind that, if not alongside of it, to me, is the supply chain. Where can we find a very high skilled, productive, resilient, responsive, advanced supply system? That's going to be the two main drivers. I remember talking with a woman who at the time was working for the chamber. She now works for the World Trade Center down in Miami. She says, I lose more foreign direct investment deals to them not seeing the workforce they're looking for than I am to any kind of subsidy or offsite. So I think the new game in town is what kind of workforce do you have? What kind of education? What does that pipeline look like? What does your talent development infrastructure look like? And we in Florida should be proud of where we're at. I don't know if the rest of the world is aware of that, but that's should be part of our marketing is our skill sets. And as we're working on with this group, we're trying our best to elevate the value contribution of our supply chains. And so I think that will be a driving force. Whether that ideology on, incentives ever changes, I don't know. That's a difficult one to fight, and those Enterprise and the last two governors, I think, did a pretty good job of trying, and they did not win,
Thank you very much. Any other questions out there? Feel free to put them in the chat. And at this point in time, Kevin, we're so grateful that you and Mike and Connor were able to join us today. And I see you, Amanda. Thank you for putting the link in for the report. It's in the chat, everyone. But at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Greg Maloney, who will kind of take it from here and continue to put questions in the chat, because we still have 10 more minutes that we can answer or discuss, or anything that you'd like that's on your mind. Oops, here comes one. I'll read this one, and then Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you after we read this and let Kevin respond. So the next question, I just toured SAFT Americas in Jacksonville this morning. They make advanced lithium batteries. Their main complaint was the high skill level professionals. They are extremely satisfied hiring technicians from the US Navy, but the higher skilled degree professionals they have to bring from other states.
Well, have them call me and Elaine, and we'll help them with that.
Yes, I mean, we've got plenty of talent.
But
Yeah.
to be fair, Elaine, both of our programs are relatively new, so I think we're still kind of building the high skilled workforce here. But I'm sorry. Go ahead and continue.
No, I'm glad you jumped in. It's perfect timing. So
I would say have them contact us. We have whether it's at the college level or even some of the technicians that I think they're referring to. We work very closely with the 24 state colleges that do a lot of the technical education across the state. And if there's a demand in a particular area, they should maybe make that better known. We have a guy on our team, a colleague of Mike's, Ernie Friend, who deals with a lot of our manufacturing education. And he is a notorious partner builder. He will put the manufacturer into the college and have them talking directly with each other about specifically what they need. It may be that they move to an area or they're in an area where there wasn't that base level of or that production, if you will, of the kind of workers they're looking for. That's a good place to start, is Ernie. And Ernie could also, as he said, they've been successful with veterans. We work closely with Veterans Florida that helps place veterans in companies like that. And they can place those companies as early as 6 months before they're even out of, if we would call it, out of the service. So the Army will actually kind of co-fund that transition process for, not the Army, but the military will co-fund that transition process. So that's another area where, we can do it, but they're welcome to contact me. You saw on one of the slides, there was my contact information. Contact Mike and Mike will get you to the right people in our shop.
That's great, Kevin.
to
Thank
deal
you.
with that.
Jorge goes on to say, thank you, Jorge, that they're in need of electrical, mechanical, and chemical engineers. So it would be great to maybe have Florida Makes as a partner there to, dig into the best resources. I know Dr. Maloney is very familiar with where those skills might be, and there you go. He's just posted his information as well.
That was actually Stanley that posted that.
Oh, Stanley, I'm sorry. I'm so
Thank you,
sorry,
Stanley.
Stanley.
But yeah, no, I think so. This is an interesting challenge, and as I said earlier, Elaine and I both of our programs are they're not brand new, but they're much newer than your typical business or technology degree that are out there. So we are building a base of, I think, a good amount of technical people in the state. At the same time, for me, going from Miami to Jacksonville, while we're the same state, we're still pretty far apart. I used to live in Chicago in the Midwest, and the amount of time it takes for me to drive from Miami to Jacksonville, when I was in Chicago, I could have driven to 20 different states. So there is a bit of a we are Florida, but we are very different from from the top to the bottom, and we have a lot of kind of diversity, but a lot of different schools. FSU is much closer to Jacksonville than Elaine and I are, and I have no problem promoting another state school. I know that they have wonderful technical programs also, but I think there is probably a need for all of our programs to maybe start promoting a little bit more the wonderful students that we have that we're graduating that can support a lot of these businesses. And I think that's just something that we maybe need to work on a little bit more. But Jorge, for sure, please send anyone that says anything like this, please send them to me and Elaine, and we'll do whatever we can to help them fill those positions with Florida graduates instead of them having to go to other states.
Be happy to. And as Stanley just posted another kind of fact here, or based on ZipRecruiter data, hopefully it's fact. The average annual pay for an engineer in Miami is $100,754, based on ZipRecruiter data. So it sounds like Kevin might be onto something too, where somebody's getting it and starting to, bring it up, but it's still probably, I don't know how that compares to the national average, Greg or anybody else on the call, if you know.
I can say that we information in the report about average wages across manufacturing throughout different parts of the state. There's also information about, so you can see sort of where wages are in manufacturing across the state. Also, how wages are relative to average wages in the state overall. Wages in manufacturing are higher and markedly higher than wages in all industries across the state. Or kind of the overall average median wages in the state. So there are some resources there, and then I can't specifically speak to where the wage figure for Miami is versus the national average. I think it depends quite a lot on the specific slice of engineering or so on as to what those wage equivalents are on a national basis, but. There's,
If you could share that contact at that company, the more I think about it, there's a lot more things that we could sort of send their way. I don't want to get into them all on the call, but we can follow up even just by email.
Yeah. Jorge goes on to give some other interesting news about what's going on in North Florida. He was saying that the UF is still 75 miles from Jacksonville, but UF is also opening a new 300 million graduate campus in downtown Jacksonville, and that will be helpful in the future. But for now, the biggest competitor is Georgia. Georgia and the incentives that we talked about earlier, in Jorge's opinion, is really one of the biggest inhibitors.
I know they just launched a new program at UNF, a bachelor's in manufacturing or advanced manufacturing. Brand new, I think, ABET accredited program. So that, it's probably not out there in the know just yet, but.
And Jorge, we have a very good relationship with Moaz Lamayam, who is the president of UNF. Moaz was here at the Numa College of Business at USF and recently transitioned into the role as president there. I'd be happy to reach out and, just send me your contact. I'll type my email in the chat.
and we do have just a couple minutes left, so I wanted to allow Greg to talk about the next webinar in the series. And
Awesome, Mike, thank you. So yes, let me just take a minute here to share with everyone the topic for the next webinar, which is going to take place at the end of July. We don't have the exact date yet, but we should have it posted on the Florida Supply Chain Summit website soon. And the topic is flowers. The reason the topic is flowers is because people may not be aware of this, but Florida is the #1 state in the country as far as flower imports for both ocean and air. In fact, more than 90% of all the flowers that are imported into the country come in through Florida. So this is actually a huge part of our economy. A lot of people aren't necessarily aware of, but it really does do a lot for Florida. And it's obviously an extremely complex industry and supply chain because of the seasonal spikes. There's probably not a whole lot of other industries that have kind of such a huge variation in demand than the flower industry, driven around Valentine's Day and Mother's Day and those types of things. So there's really a lot of complexity that goes into this. A lot of great businesses in Florida that bring a lot of money into the state based on this. So we've got an exciting webinar that we're putting together. It's going to include some flower importers. It's going to include some ocean and air freight businesses that are all going to be able to talk about the complexity of this industry and how it provides so much to this state. So be on the lookout for that on our website. And also we're going to have kind of some LinkedIn postings about it soon, as soon as we have the actual date nailed down. So if you're interested in that, I'd be looking forward to seeing you all at that webinar sometime at the end of July. And I believe with that, I think that ends the webinar here. Kevin and Mike, I want to personally thank you for your time and all that wonderful information you were able to share with us. Does anyone else have any additional questions or comments that they want to make before we close out the webinar? Okay. Well, once again, on behalf of the Florida Supply Chain Summit, I want to thank everyone for their participation. Oh, Kevin, did you have? No.
No.
I thought you had your hand up. I want to thank everyone for their participation. It's been an awesome webinar with a lot of great information. And I look forward to seeing you all next month at the next webinar. And then hopefully also in person in September when we have the Florida Supply Chain Summit. All right. I hope everyone has a wonderful day and look forward to seeing you all soon.
All right, thank you.